Grab some popcorn and a favorite chair. The love of movies is why we're here. Press play and don't delay. Let's still be our guide to a cinematic day. Fill out the movies from the silver screen to his podcast stream. Phil's covering every movie dream. Fill out the movies. Fill out the movies.
Today, my friends, we are going back in time. Back in time to 1978, to be exact. The year when Grease is the word. Audiences are once again afraid to go back in the water thanks to Jaws 2. And Halloween is about to become more than just a fall-centric holiday. No, I am not talking about Grease Lightning, nor my beloved Halloween franchise. In fact, today I'm talking about a totally different film, a movie that came out in December of 1978, a little film that took audiences to their local cinemas to believe and see with their own eyes on the big screen a man flying. The motto, the tagline was, "You'll believe a man could fly." And yes, today I am talking about the classic superhero film, the one that started it all. Some would even argue the greatest superhero comic book movie of all time, 1978's Superman the Movie. Starring Christopher Reeve, Gene Hackman, and Margot Kidder. This is, as I said, the first ever superhero film, the first mainstream comic book movie that became the template for all films in the genre that followed. And frankly, we who love this particular genre of films owe a great debt to this movie because while it is debatable whether or not it has held up over the years, nearly 50 in fact, and I have thoughts to say on that in just a little bit, it cannot be denied the charm and cleverness behind the scope and scale of this movie, to say nothing of Christopher Reeve's iconic performance. This is the film that took Superman from the small screen, from the comic book pages, and put him on the silver screen and made him an international icon. Now, today is the first of a three-part series that I will be doing dedicated to Superman movies in anticipation of the new Superman film starring David Corenswet and directed by James Gunn coming out later this summer. So I thought it would be fun, super in fact, and timely to revisit some Superman films and get prepared for the new one dropping on July 11th. But before I take flight with my thoughts on Superman, let me say welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Phil at the Movies. I am your host, Phil Walsh, and you are listening to episode number 164 of this ongoing podcast that is, you guessed it, for the love of movies. And as I said, this will be the first of a three-part series dedicated to Superman movies. I wanted to start with the film that started it all, the original Superman film. In a couple weeks' time, I am going to be talking with a buddy of mine about Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, the movie that brought Batman and Superman together on the big screen. And then finally, in July, I will conclude with my review and reaction to the new Superman film dropping on July 11th. So that is the plan for the next couple of weeks regarding Superman-related content here on the show. And it's interesting because I have never spoken really about Superman on this show. And I mean, it will probably come as no surprise to you, my fellow listeners, my friends. I am a Batman fan. I'm a Batman guy first and foremost. Batman forever is my motto. And not that I would say I'm negative towards Superman, but he is not my cup of tea, if you will, when it comes to superhero films or comic book movies. And it's a certain kind of Superman film that really is more to my liking. And therefore, I just have not commented or done a review on any of the films in the franchise. But now the time seemed particularly appropriate. So I do hope you enjoy today's show. Now, before I start with that, let me just, of course, say thank you as always for tuning in. And if you haven't done so already, if you could rate and review this podcast on Apple, if you could give it a subscribe, like, all of it helps with the pesky algorithms. And if you would be so kind to share this podcast with like-minded movie buffs and friends, it would mean a great deal to me. And again, would help continue to grow and expand the show. And as always, I am grateful to each and every one of you, the listeners, the friends of this show, for tuning in week after week and being a part of this cinematic journey with me. I have said it before, and I will say it again, and I know I probably sound like a broken record at this point, but I mean it from the bottom of my heart. None of this would be possible without your support and affection and just continued listenership and tuning in each and every week. So thank you, and thank you. All right, so 1978, we finally get Superman the movie. Now, Superman had made a quasi-appearance on the big screen back in the 1950s, late 1940s, in a serial format, but this was the first time that the character was going to be brought with a big budget, an actual script, if you will, and an attempt to tell a more, perhaps not grounded story, but a story that would be entertaining to the masses, not just a section of the audience or specifically to comic book fans, but a movie that could appeal to everybody. And the history of this film is frankly quite impressive. The script for the film was massive. The intention was to film both Superman and Superman 2 back to back. And while that was partially completed, there were some issues behind the scenes, so to speak. The director, Richard Donner, ended up getting replaced midway through. Another director was brought in to finish the film, and there was a lot of tension. There was a lot of debate and changes, and then later years down the road, there was a subsequent director's cut released. I'm not going to go into all that today. That would be an entire podcast. And frankly, I am not that much of an expert on the history of Superman on film to properly give you that history. Just more of a tangential interest in the subject matter. But this film, as it stands, the original movie, was quite impressive just in terms of the scope and scale. Now, you figure this is coming right after Star Wars, which, of course, had changed the way movies were made, changed the way movies were marketed. And so Superman really arrived at the optimal time where audiences were interested in that sort of escapism and these big budget spectacles such as Star Wars, or you think Close Encounters of the Third Kind, all of those kinds of movies were dominating the cinematic landscape around this time. So Superman was really perfectly poised to capitalize on the moment. And again, the film came out in 1978, was a huge success, made Christopher Reeve an overnight household name, and changed the perception of Superman. For a time, he had been just, of course, relegated to comic books, or there was, of course, the George Reeve series, TV show back in the 1950s, which was certainly popular, but this movie was on an entirely different scale. And that is really a testament to the director, Richard Donner, who, instead of wanting to tell a story about all of the fantastical elements that might be associated with Superman, he wanted to ground it in a way and focus on the story of Clark Kent and his sort of dual identity, if you will, as the mild-mannered reporter and, of course, the Man of Steel, vis-a-vis his relationship with Lois Lane. And that is really the heart and soul of the movie, and certainly it would be tame by today's standards. I can see at the time this would have been quite a compelling angle to tell the film. Now, the movie itself, just to sort of give you a quick synopsis, it is a straightforward origin tale. And when I said this is sort of the template that a lot of other superhero films would follow down the road, I think of Spider-Man from 2002, the first one directed by Sam Raimi. I think of Batman Begins. Both of those films really are inspired by this film and the way in which they tell the origin of their titular character. Now, in this movie, it spends the first 20 or so minutes documenting the end of Krypton, Superman's home planet, his travel to Earth as a small child, being adopted by the Kents, growing up, realizing he has all of these incredible superhuman abilities, and then finally bringing us up to the present day where he is working as a reporter in Metropolis and then becoming Superman. The film also pits him against his arch-enemy, the criminal mastermind who is plotting evil real estate machinations, Lex Luthor, played by the late, great Gene Hackman. In addition, of course, there is the budding romance between Clark and Margot Kidder. All of that brought together with the charm and the wit and at times somewhat campy elements that make this movie certainly not what you would expect going into a superhero film, particularly by modern standards, but there is an earnestness and a charm to the film which certainly cannot be denied. Of course, tied all together by John Williams' epic and at this point staple score for the Superman character. It has been a part of every movie since this film. It's going to be in the new one later this summer, so it's pretty much become a part of the Superman legacy on screen. Now, the movie itself, as I indicated, is not my cup of tea. It's not my preference for a Superman story. And that is because, A, I am not a Superman fan, so I go into it with sort of a particular bias. But to me, the film itself is a little flat. It doesn't have necessarily the rising tensions and heroic moments that we might associate with a modern superhero film. I would have a hard time seeing this film, if it was to be released today as it is, finding a particular audience because it does not have the certain punch and vigor that we would associate with not just a Superman film, but really any comic book movie. I even think of Batman 1989, which came out, of course, 11 years after this film. I think of that movie as a much more action-oriented and more psychologically gripping story, even though, of course, there have been more compelling tales done even in the Batman canon, most notably the Dark Knight trilogy. But Superman itself has a certain charm to it, but there are elements of campy fun, which I think at the time audiences probably appreciated, but I found it to be a little dated when I watched it. Particularly, there's a scene where Lois Lane is interviewing Superman, and it's sort of a lot of innuendo and double entendres during their discussion, which I mean is fine, but it's just sort of random when you think of like a Superman movie. All of a sudden, she's asking because she knows he has X-ray vision. Does he know what color her underwear is? And of course, he does. And I mean, it's charming and it's funny and campy, but it's also like it's such a detour from. You've got a lot of high stakes at the beginning of the film with the destruction of Krypton and Superman sort of arriving on the scene in Metropolis, and then to sort of have this sort of bizarre love story handed into it. It is a little jarring, to say the least. There is, of course, Marlon Brando, who was in the film, who played Jor-El, Superman's biological father, and Brando is sort of noted for his inability to learn the lines for this film, and he had cue cards wrapped around the necks of all the staff, and production assistants on the films, and he was literally reading his lines off of cue cards. But he definitely adds a bit of gravitas to the film, which certainly you could imagine at the time, coming off of The Godfather, that must have been a major coup to get Brando for this particular film. But then, of course, you also have Gene Hackman, and while his villain certainly feels more like a direct continuation of what we might have seen in the old Batman Adam West show, for the context of this movie, the hammy, over-the-top, wacky criminal mastermind who's just out to sort of dominate the real estate market, more or less, it does work for this film. And again, that's a testament to Gene Hackman, who was an incredible performer and was able to deliver some certainly memorable moments in this film. But of course, this is a Superman film, and Christopher Reeve is at the center of it. And you cannot deny the iconic nature of his performance, of just his existence in the film, and the legacy that has followed. It's not difficult to see why so many people still associate him with the character, because he had such an impact in this particular film. I mean, he looks like Superman. He acts like Superman. The way he affects the Clark Kent personality with the change in posture and the way he slouches, it is very well done. I have always said, and I know this may be controversial, I never felt that the scripts in either this film or the three other movies that Christopher Reeve did rose to the level of his talent as an actor. He was a very gifted performer, and I think it's a shame that there wasn't a better script that could have served his talents and really gave him an opportunity to shine in a much more dramatic presence, if you will, as Superman, because he is sort of the Boy Scout, if you will. I mean, there are some dramatic beats, but it's not enough like we might see in a modern day context. But I mean, I can't deny his iconic nature and stature in this film. And he left one hell of a legacy that everybody who plays Superman sort of feels they have to be compared and stand up and try to stack up next to that performance. It's an indomitable performance, which has stood the test of time. I just only wish, as an aside, I wish the scripts could have been better to serve Christopher Reeve's talent, because I think he really was underserved ultimately by these scripts. But again, I would not say that I am sort of overtly negative on this film. I think it is important as a piece of cinematic history, and certainly in the comic book movie lore, this movie is the tentpole that started this entire genre. So I have a lot of respect for it and for what Richard Donner, the director, was able to accomplish and sort of laying the groundwork for other superhero films to follow. I mean, it's easy to sort of dismiss it as, oh, it's campy, it's dated by today's standards, but it started it all. It laid the foundation. Without it, we would not have Batman or Spider-Man. Of course, the Dark Knight trilogy, the Marvel Cinematic Universe would not exist as it does. I mean, this movie is the reason for the public fascination with superhero films. And so, I mean, while, if asked what is my preferred version of Superman, I would say it is Man of Steel. I think that is just a much better told and executed story. And personally, I like it when Superman is grounded in more of a reality and is more valuable, where we can sort of see ourselves in him and vice versa. I think that's a much more interesting way to go, especially when you have a character who is larger than life, who is the quote-unquote Man of Steel. If there's a way to sort of humanize him, to bring him down to our level, I think that's a much more engaging story. I mean, if you have a character that can simply turn back the hands of time because an event goes away, they don't like it, well, then that to me is not a very exciting story and kind of defeats the point of a real interesting character development. But that's a discussion for another day. In terms of this film, I respect it, I appreciate it, and again, there is a lot to certainly enjoy. It is a fun watch. Again, it is not for everybody. It's not a film that I have to revisit all the time, but I still can respect its accomplishments as a film that moved forward the genre and brought it into the mainstream. And again, as I said, ultimately became a template for other films to follow, whether it be Spider-Man or Batman Begins and other subsequent superhero films. So this was a larger-than-life film that has an even bigger legacy now nearly 50 years later. But Superman, the movie, it certainly does soar, though for me it doesn't soar as high as it might go, and that is not even putting into a nostalgia factor. It's a film. I can appreciate it, I can respect it, but to me, I would much rather have a grounded and frankly grittier version of the character of Superman. But again, that is just me, and I know I probably am in the minority of that opinion. But that is, again, I'd rather have the sort of the conflicted soldier as opposed to the Boy Scout. But again, that is my take, and I respect anyone who has a differing opinion, particularly those who are more ardent fans of Superman. But there we go. There are my thoughts on the first Superman film. As I said, the first of a 3-part series. Up in a couple weeks will be Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and of course finishing off with Superman in July. But that does it for me today, everybody. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Can't believe I finally got to tackle a Superman film, and certainly an appropriate one to start off with for this little limited series. But as always, thank you for tuning in. I'll be back next week where we'll do this all over again for the love of movies.
Feels covering every movie dream. Feel at the movies makes every movie